Thank you very much, and thank you for sparing everyone the details of our background. That's sort of a waste of time, I think, sometimes. But I'm really delighted to be back here in Rome, back at the NATO Defense College, and to have this opportunity to share the podium with the ambassador. We had a very interesting conversation on our way here today, and I hope we were able to relay some of that to you. My purpose this morning is to talk about cyber warfare, or cyber defense, terms that are very sensitive and subject to interpretation, but I really want to try to give you an appreciation and an idea of the world we live in at this very moment and the pace and the direction of change in the cyber world, because we are accustomed to things changing very fast. But let me assure you that in the cyber world, things are changing much more quickly than we can even begin to appreciate. And so with that, I'd like to start the presentation. These are the things that I propose to discuss with you this morning, and the ambassador, of course, will go into much more detail on NATO-related issues, and I will try to avoid those so that he can speak it in detail. But this gives you an appreciation of what I'll be talking about. I like to start with this particular picture because you are all familiar with the pictures taken from space of the spread of electricity. And you're always, I think, like I am, struck by the places that have a lot of electricity, a lot of power, and those that do not. And when you look at this picture, and this is not taken from space, obviously, because this deals with the spread of the internet, we always talk about the world being interconnected, and this picture clearly demonstrates that. But when you look at that picture, what stands out? Russia and China, correct, absolutely. How can that be? China has the largest numbers of internet users in the world. But the fact of the matter is that China is not connected to the rest of the world. There is the great internet wall in China, and China, as a practical matter, functions as an intranet. And so if you live in China, you don't necessarily, in fact, it's pretty obvious that you don't have connection with the rest of the world, and that's why China and Russia, to another degree, as well as some other areas, are not depicted as being connected with the rest of the world. I show you that for another reason, because the pace and direction of change that I mentioned is going to change that map. What will it look like in 10 years? What will it look like in 5 years? Because one of the trends that I think we will see is, because of the pervasive threats associated with the cyber world, is that we will begin to take different critical systems offline. That is, they will no longer be connected. A good example is the electrical system. Because it is subject to pervasive threats, the possibility is, in fact the trend is now, to begin to take the electrical system offline so that it cannot be attacked by outsiders. Okay. Now, this gives you an idea of where we stand earlier this year when I was here doing my research. The trend, of course, is to increase in a number of these areas here. You have the total population of the world and the number of the people who live in cities, and then the unique mobile users. So half the people in the world have a mobile telephone. Nearly half the people in the world are internet users. And then active social media users right down there at about a third of the world population. And of course, you can see on the right how fast this is changing, how fast this is growing. So it gives you an idea of where we stand in the recent past. Again, I'll be interested to see where this stands in 2 months' time. This gives you an idea, at least from a snapshot that was taken in the United States back in 2016. It gives you an idea of how people use the internet. And I'm always fascinated to discuss this with my 27-year-old son, because he makes the point, he said, "Dad, a lot of that's outdated. This is moving so fast that a lot of these things that people used just a year ago are being displaced and used by others." And when I look at some of these things and I see that Uber is up there, you have YouTube with every minute 3 million people are using YouTube, and on and on and on. And of course, we all know that mortar and brick retailing is being replaced by Amazon and Alibaba and others. This picture is changing. One of the things, of course, that strikes me, however, if I say to myself, if this is what happens in a minute in the United States, who is doing the work? Because if you're watching YouTube or shopping on Amazon, you're obviously not working at that particular time. So this issue of getting people's attention, this is one of the things we discussed on the way over here with the ambassador, is such an issue. Getting people's undivided attention on a particular app or program is what commerce in this field is all about. Now, when we discuss cybersecurity, I think there are a couple of important concepts that we need to keep in mind. And it is used not only to protect the hardware, but to protect the products that the hardware uses, the information as well. And it's not only protected from attack, but other kinds of damage and also unauthorized access. So that's what we're looking at. The trouble is that I can present a concept of cybersecurity here, and someone else can come up after me and before me and give you another example of what they mean by this. But the problem we have in the legal area is that there are few settled terms that everyone uses in more or less the same manner. And this is a huge problem because in the cybernet world, you can conduct activities globally but be protected because you happen to be in a particular country that does not have a legal framework that allows people to prosecute you. So you can be a cyber criminal and be protected from prosecution in many ways. So, but this gives you an idea of what we mean when we talk about cyber security. And in the domain that we're looking at, that picture of the world, you see something that looks like this. It's globally connected to a very high degree with economic and other kinds of information. It is a contested environment because there is very little agreement. It is moving so fast, and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty associated with the cyber world. It's mostly in private hands. The government is behind the curve in the cyber world. You see that, of course, in military establishments and so forth. We are always playing catch-up. The commercial world is ahead of us in terms of the products they're developing, in terms of the services they offer, and what they can do, and it's mostly in private hands. And of course, in the internet, you are who you say you are. You can take on identities that are not associated with your real identity, and as a consequence, there's an extraordinary level of anonymity. We don't know who we're really talking to. The problem we have as human beings is if we see something on a screen, we believe it. It must be true. It wouldn't be there if it wasn't true. And that, my friends, is a huge problem that we have in this particular field because we simply don't know the source. We simply cannot confirm the credibility of the information that we see. I've already spoken about how it is changing and the rapidity with which it is changing, the celerity, and the direction that it's moving in. And this is something that really is difficult for us as human beings to understand because so much of the change and so much of the pace of the change is driven not by human beings, but it is driven by computers, by machines, a subject that I will return to in just a couple of minutes. And lastly, the issue that you have to ask yourselves is if indeed this is a new form of warfare, and if it is a new form of warfare, does it require different tools, different concepts, different legal constructs, a whole range of issues that we're confronted with. The bottom line, however, is that this is not someone else's job. We're accustomed, I think, as Army officers, as military officers, to understanding that the J3 is responsible for this, the J5 for that, the J1 for personnel, and so forth. It's somebody else's responsibility. In the cyber world, for reasons that I will get to in a minute, this is your job. Even if you have a cyber command, even if you have dedicated individuals who work for you to do this, this is not a responsibility you can put on others because this is so pervasive and you are so dependent on it that it is your responsibility as well. And I really want to stress that with you. And as you know, within NATO, this has now become, I learned this morning, of course, it's not the fifth domain, it's the fourth domain because NATO doesn't have space. But we refer to it as the fifth domain. And what's interesting here is you are Army officers, naval officers, Air Force officers, and civilians, and you're accustomed, of course, to operating in a joint environment. But really, if you're a naval officer, what happens in the land campaign is something that those guys do over there. That's not true in the cyber world, as I just explained, because this is essential to your ability to carry out military operations, is your ability to communicate, to exchange information, and so forth. And so I think it's appropriate that in the 5 domains that you see there, that cyber is at the bottom, because it supports everything that you do. And we're accustomed to having access to information, to being able to transmit information. And I think what the challenge we are going to have is, in military operations of the future, is when we are denied access to those areas by our potential adversaries. So it's appropriate that is the fifth domain. It is absolutely critical that we understand that it underpins everything we try to do. Okay, why does this matter to you? Because it's an unclear concept. There's an extraordinary amount of uncertainty about the types of threats, about where the threats come from, and there are a broad range of definitions, as we'll discuss. It's a growing space with rapid expansion across all sectors, not just in the government, not just individuals, but most prominently, of course, in commercial applications and so forth. Extraordinary penetration and pervasiveness with everything that we do. And the competition in the cyber world is also extraordinary. And of course, those of us who are not always involved with the commercial world, it's sometimes difficult for us to appreciate and understand how quickly things move in that particular world, and how rapidly people come out with new ideas, find investors, and move forward. But it is crucial for national security. Think about critical infrastructure, which was this topic I looked at here at the NATO Defense College when I was here. 80% of it or more in most countries is in private hands. Even energy systems in many countries is not nationalized. It is in fact in private hands. And we in the military depend not upon electrical power that we produce. No, we're just like everyone else. We buy it from someone else who produces it. That means that we in the military are dependent on a critical resource that we do not control. And the other issues, of course, associated with the economic vitality that we depend upon. So the bottom line, of course, is that because of the nature and the pervasiveness of the threats, is that there is an increasing reliance on governments to provide security for critical infrastructure, just to name one area. I will tell you that what I learned while I was here at the NATO Defense College in my research is that governments are uniquely ill-equipped to provide the kind of security that we will need, not just today, but tomorrow and beyond, to provide security for critical infrastructure. If the lights go out, we're all going to look to the government to get them turned back on, and we will be disappointed. And again, why this all matters to you is that the objectives between different countries is vast. The objectives that the United States, that Germany, that France, that Italy have differ among themselves, but are markedly different with respect to potential adversaries and others, potential partners as well. So the rapidly escalating environment, this is increasing tension between the governments, individuals, and private enterprises. And we have to ask ourselves, what does cyber warfare look like today? What will it look like in a couple of years' time? And what will it look like in 10 years' time? So the other aspect here is, of course, that the economic sector, which we all depend upon, is a target-rich environment. If you are a criminal, this is a great opportunity to make a lot of money with very little fear of arrest and prosecution. And of course, we have to come up with common standards, and I know the ambassador will talk about some of the common protocols and standards that we are absolutely needed. The fact that there is a lack of international legal framework to deal with these problems is a huge and growing problem, because who do you turn to try to get satisfaction, legal satisfaction, if you are a victim of cybercrime, for example. You think it's coming from a country where they don't have laws that deal with that. The last point is a very important point. Everybody knows what that is, right? If I ask you what that is, you'll say that's a smartphone. You'll say that's a computer, all of which is correct. But I would suggest to you that this is, in fact, a radio transmitter. Isn't that what it does? A mobile phone, you communicate with this to a tower, which commutes to another tower and another tower. And in fact, when you use this device, you are transmitting. And we all know as military officers that when you transmit, you have a security problem. And that's huge because our expectation of privacy associated with this is the same that we have with a landline telephone in most instances. We don't even think about it. We assume it's protected. And in fact, when you transmit information on this device, you are making it extraordinarily easy for others to get that information. Up until recently, I used this device to communicate with my bank, to communicate with other investment opportunities and so forth. I no longer do so because this has been compromised over and over again. It is being compromised right now. And when we get to this issue of privacy, I'm one of those people in the United States who was a victim of the breach of the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. Me and 22 million other people, including my wife, including my son. All of his information has now been compromised. And so I say that and I mention that because I'm here with you and I'm telling you that a lot of information that you think or may presume is secure, in fact, is not. And the penetration of your device is ongoing. My device just blinked. Someone's communicating with this device. They're taking information from it. So this whole issue of privacy, we have an expectation of privacy that is completely unrealistic in the world we live in today and in tomorrow. Here you see some challenges that we're faced with. There is no single architect. This is not static, but it's extraordinarily dynamic. There are all of these insecure systems or systems that have some degree of security that is easily overcome by those who wish to do so, and that innovation, it's moving so fast that it's difficult for us to understand. And as a consequence, frankly, security has been an afterthought. We have to change that mindset. That's extraordinarily important for what we're trying to do. We have to involve cybersecurity in our national security constructs. It absolutely top-tier national security priority. That is why we see the rise of so many cybersecurity commands and others. More people are emphasizing cybersecurity, and there is a growing recognition of how much we're losing, how much information, how much money is going out the window. So not only in governments, but also in business, people are trying to come up with cybersecurity constructs and concepts and programs. In almost every instance, we are way behind the power curve when compared to those who do us harm. So here we see some key threat concepts, because I'd like to move now into the idea of threats. As you see, it's already, technology is increasing, but it is not linear. We're accustomed to seeing technology move, get better, faster, and so forth. Cyber technology does not necessarily move in that way. And the government has an extraordinarily difficult job in trying to provide security for this. With respect to society, you see that cyber technology development doesn't come from a single office somewhere. As I told you, it's an extraordinarily competitive environment. And then we have developments in what we call the Internet of Things, which, very simply understood, is machines communicating with other machines. This is a topic I will spend just a minute or two on, because I know time is short, but I want to give you an appreciation for that. But this is very interesting here, because we, in the armed forces, in the ministries of defense of our countries, are concerned with what's at the top, the loss of national security information and the impact on our ability to carry out military operations. But in fact, we need to consider and understand the whole spectrum of threats and challenges associated with this. For example, in the upper left, you see the attack on control systems. I told you about what happens when people hack into our energy system and shut down the lights and everything else that we are so dependent upon. What happens over on the upper right, the data corruption, loss of business information. Businesses are constantly being penetrated. Their information is being stolen. Their information is being used by others. Business information penetration by Chinese hackers is a well-known phenomenon that I'm sure you're very familiar with. That information, of course, means that China doesn't have to invest in developing new products. They can simply steal them and then use them. And then the exploitation of government's information. And this gets to the whole issue of penetration of electoral systems, the use of social media, and so forth. And it was fascinating in the Economist just a couple of weeks ago, they had this particular cover, as you see here in articles, about how social media is a threat to democracy. I recall thinking 20 years ago that the internet would be a boon for democracy, as everyone would have access to the facts. In fact, that's not the case, as we have seen in the last few years, last couple of years, where people are able to use the social media networks to present alternative facts, to present things that are not true, fake news, and so forth, all of these concepts. And so I would say today that I was wrong 20 years ago, and that in fact the internet has not advanced democracy, but has become a hindrance to the advance of democracy. That's the kind of world we're in. And lastly, of course, the issue of personal information, and I've already mentioned the problem that I myself have had in this particular area as well. But we have to also think this personal information and its impact on operational security when soldiers are out in the field and they're using those devices to communicate with their families and so forth. All of that is information that is available to our adversaries in an operational environment. So some of the unique challenges, again, the immediate interconnectedness, things moving at the speed of light, and that is in fact what they do. The foundational and important role of the private sector in developing so many systems, they're far beyond the government in this particular area. The range of threat actors, which I'll talk about in just a minute here, the ability to route attacks through many different parties, thus this problem of attribution is so difficult because it's so difficult to figure out where it actually came from. Identifying the attackers and attributing the things to them. If there is an attack on our system and we want to conduct a counterattack in the cyber world, who do you call? How do you know who did it? Can you be certain that the attack emanated from a particular user? Before you conducted an attack, you have to know that information. And then we have the risks are all associated with all the threats and attacks that we are currently seeing. I'm going to talk about a couple of the source of these attacks. Let me move on to that. I'll talk about who is attacking. What I'd like to do is you see the range of actors in the threat world. Let's talk about the last couple on the right of that particular scale. Let's start with terrorists. You know that terrorists are very adept. They have a lot of young people. They can leverage those young people and their ease of using the internet and other devices and systems to do all of these things, to carry out operations, to recruit, and so forth. So there's a tremendous threat associated with the terrorist use of the internet in all of these areas, and particularly when it comes to secret communications in the lower right. We are at the point now where encryption is available, commercial encryption is available to terrorists and to criminals that far exceeds what the government can do on its own. We are at the point where we cannot penetrate terrorist and criminal systems. We cannot get access to information that we absolutely need. They have the advantage when it comes to encryption, not governments. With respect to transnational organized crime, growing field. You are all familiar with the ransomware, the attacks that have happened where people cannot access their information unless and until they pay a ransom, and then they are given a password and they can access this particular information. Great way to make money. The attribution is difficult. We don't really know, or at least we don't think we know, who is conducting these particular operations. But if you're a criminal, this is a tremendous opportunity. And as I mentioned, International borders, one of the dirty little secrets that I've learned is that international borders, from a criminal perspective, are actually a business opportunity. If you're a criminal and you want to carry out your operations internationally, you can hide behind borders. You can hide in a country that does not prosecute for reasons of their own. And so therefore, rather than being something secure, that provides security, in fact, borders are a criminal opportunity, and they represent a threat. And let me stress, when we talk about threats in the cyber world, we're accustomed in the military to talking about threats as something that may happen, a potential threat. Russian forces on the border of Estonia is a potential threat. That term has a different kind of meaning in the cyber world. A threat in the cyber world, as you will see, is something that is happening not just in the future, it is happening now. When we talk about a threat, you need to change your thinking on that, because you are being attacked now by all of these threats. Not tomorrow, but now. And so it's a different concept of threat than most of us have been accustomed to dealing with. With regard to nation states, we're very familiar with Russian, Chinese, and others, but they are not the only countries that conduct these kinds of operations. North Korea is another, Brazil is another, United States, the list goes on. I would think that it is reasonable to assume that most of the countries in here have a offensive cyber capability, whether or not they use it or not, but nevertheless may be in a position to use those. Although, as we have learned in just the last couple of weeks, for example, a number of these offensive capabilities have been penetrated and exposed with regard to the National Security Agency in the United States. As we know, Shadow Brokers has broken into that system and made public a number of these things. The term in the lower left is very important in this world. When we talk about advanced persistent threats, we are talking about things that are ongoing all the time. These are conducted by machines, and machines do not rest. And so when we talk about an advanced persistent threat, we are really talking about a persistent penetration of our systems happening all the time. And this is a function of the fact that machines, as I say, don't get tired. The Internet of Things. This is when we talk about threats emanating from machines. This is the world that we live in. Devices are compromised, services are disrupted, data is extracted, bad data is put back into the system, and it is all done every minute, every second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 or 6 days a year, all the time. These are conducted by machines that constantly access information. The lighting system in here is controlled by a computer. That computer is connected to another computer. All of that information is available, and the fact of the matter is that machines can process this information so much faster than we can as human beings, and they can do it all the time. When we talk about the threats that are posed by artificial intelligence in the future, this is really what we're talking about. Talking about machines communicating with other machines and telling other machines what to do. And this, as I say, is absolutely pervasive as in the world we're living today. And it will get only worse as we continue to move in the direction of autonomous machines, machines that can gather, process information, and make decisions on their own without any human interface. In the interest of time, I will move beyond this to some of the other areas. One of the things is the deep web. Now, we looked at that picture of the world and looked at the penetration of the Internet. In fact, the Internet, as we know and understand it, is only part of that system, because there is a whole system below that, which we've referred to as the dark web or the deep web, where so many of the criminal activities, so many of the terrorist activities, because of encryption and so forth, take place. People wonder how people can get guns, buy them on the Internet. Well, they do it because they do it in the deep web. And the best way to understand the deep or dark web is to understand that this is by invitation only. You know, the rest of the internet, you go on Google, you go and look up an idea or some information, you're operating on the surface. That's available to everybody. It's not password protected. The deep web is not only password protected, you can't even get into it unless someone invites you or unless a machine invites another machine to do so. And so a lot of the activities that we're talking about that represent persistent threats take place, in fact, in the so-called deep or dark web. And it's not just criminals and terrorists. Governments operate down there as well. But it's not just the internet on the surface that we need to be concerned about. Internet of Things, the machines to machines in the year 2020, we know there's about 5 billion connected people right now in the internet, but there are at least 25 billion systems that are interconnected, that we know are connected. 25 billion systems. In fact, the number is much higher because machines communicate with other machines in ways that we don't even understand. They do it constantly. They constantly seek out abilities to penetrate other systems because that's how they function in many instances. And so it's a huge amount of systems that are connected. The opportunities you see for profit is enormous here as well, the amount of money, the amount of, these are concepts that are just hard to understand, 50 trillion gigabytes of data on a daily basis that's exchanged, and all of the problems that are associated with the security risks in the Internet of Things, which is expanding constantly as we move forward. You know, in the cyber world, frankly, as I've tried to give you an idea of, is there are so many things we need to be concerned about, and it's not somebody else's responsibility. And so if we're going to move forward with a system of providing security in the internet world, we have to involve more than one actor. We cannot do this alone. We have to, in fact, have a national strategy supported by a national security strategy involving other ministries, as you can see on this area, particularly law enforcement and others. And we have to have a comprehensive approach. And that word comprehensive is one, of course, that you're familiar with, comprehensive approach. It has to have real meat on the bones in the area of cybersecurity as a comprehensive government system. So strategy considerations for cyber operations, we have to differentiate between offense and defense. Our security, we need to understand, will never be 100% ever. There will always be problems. NSA probably thought that they were pretty secure, and in fact they weren't. Constant cyber penetration by machines all the time. Our risk management, we have to determine what is absolutely critical, what is vulnerable to what kinds of threats. And so this business of risk assessment, risk management, taking risks and knowing that we're taking risks is something that we have to be very, very careful about. We have to ask ourselves, do the concepts that we have become very familiar and comfortable with over the last 50, 70 years, deterrence, dissuasion, do they function in the cyber world in any way similar to the way they functioned in the physical world when we used to deter the Soviet Union and dissuade people from taking actions? Because that depended upon holding at risk something important to potential adversaries. How do we do that? How does that function in the cyber world? How do we hold things at risk in the cyber world? And lastly, of course, in NATO, when does a cyber activity, a penetration, an attack, rise to the level of an Article 5 issue? Right? We haven't really got a way to think about that, but I'm looking forward to hear what the ambassador has to tell us on that particular issue, because this is what it's all about in NATO, is that we are an alliance, a defensive alliance, and we are ready to assist when someone invokes Article 5. Are we ready to do that when it is a cyber attack? Then we have the issue of legal considerations, applying the law of war, the laws that we are very familiar with and that have been negotiated over the last century. How do they apply? Well, we had a problem with terrorists. How do they apply to new technologies? They were never designed to deal with these kinds of challenges that we have. What is it? What is an attack? What is a penetration in the cyber world? And how do we measure the impacts if we're able to do that at all? You know, there's a real problem we have in the cyber world with attacks. If you're a company and you've been attacked and your information has been penetrated and it has been downloaded and stolen from you, what do you do about it? Do you make a public announcement and say, we have been penetrated? All our information, all our customer information is gone? Increasingly, what we see is that businesses are reluctant to do so because it is bad for business to tell your customers that their information has been stolen. So we are in a world now where we really don't know about all of these penetrations, particularly in the commercial world, because the businesses simply don't tell us. And so we're going to see the rise, for example, I think, of insurance protecting against cyber penetrations, because frankly, it's, from the standpoint of the businesses, it's a smart way to manage risk, buy insurance. But this is a big problem in this area in terms of attribution and responding in a proportional manner, which is the legal framework that we have lived under in NATO since the end of World War II, responding proportionally. Let me just spend a minute or two. Do I still have? 5, great, thank you very much. On the role of the armed forces, this is what I looked at here while I was at the NATO Defense College and wrote a paper on this particular subject. What is the appropriate role for you, the armed forces, in protecting not only your own cyber systems, but those of others, within the government and beyond the government? Now, the issue is, of course, that you're very good at protecting your own systems. This is what we do in the military. We're good at that, or at least we think we're good at that. Since we're so good at it, the danger we have is that the government will say, well, since you're so good at it, you can protect all of government systems. And this becomes an additional task for the armed forces to provide government system. And then the government may say, well, you know, you're so good at this, and energy is so critical to us that we want the armed forces to now provide cyber security for privately owned energy systems. It happened in Brazil, and I know that it is being considered elsewhere. Is this an appropriate military task in the world we live in today? After all, you are dependent, just like all of us, on energy that you get from private providers. So do you have a consequent obligation to protect the very same systems? Someone's going to knock on your door someday and ask you if you can't help out with protecting a particular system. And it's, as I say, it's happened in Brazil, and it's happened actually in the United States with our National Guard. They've been asked to help with different states in the United States in providing cybersecurity for energy systems and others. And so you have a whole range of issues associated with this legal, if the military is asked to carry out tasks that go beyond national defense and security, you have all of these considerations. Who's responsible? What are the legalities? Who's going to pay for it? Are there risks associated with it? And so forth. So I mention this because, as I say, I think based on the research that I did here, that this may become an issue for you to be considering. So my final slide here is some of the key takeaways I'd like you to take away with you and discuss in your groups and try to get an understanding of where we are with regard to cybersecurity. Your ability to carry out the conventional military operations that you are so accustomed to is under constant attack. You know, we're used to using GPS, we're used to using all those systems, and in fact, you may not be able to use them in your next operation because they have been hacked, because they have been degraded, because they have been there's a denial of access and use. Do you have a contingency plan for operating in an environment where you do not have access to the tools that you have come to rely on? And I think the answer probably, if I were answering that question, is not really. Not really. Spread of cyber capabilities has led to the need for allies and partners to develop a common threat perception. This is, of course, in the alliance a huge problem, not only in terms of conventional threats, but a threat perception with regard to the cyber world is very, very difficult because we don't see how we are equally vulnerable, even though we are in many ways. We think that the United States has a particular set of problems. The Chinese are hacking their systems, but they're not hacking ours. This is a level of ignorance that may be justified in some ways, but I would suggest to you as security professionals that this is a luxury that you cannot afford. In the interconnected world, you are equally at risk to a number of threat actors. Challenge of creating a strategic concept of defense and offense in an inadequate legal environment. Should we, for example, create automatic systems that respond without any human interface? If we're being attacked and we're being penetrated, should we simply develop a system that identifies the attack, identifies the source of the attack, and conducts counter operations without any input from you? We may be moving in that direction because we as human beings simply can't process information even remotely fast enough to be able to respond to threats as they are happening. And as I say, they are happening even as we speak. Now, you've all heard the term public-private partnership, but I would suggest to you that if we don't do it in the cyber world, a lot of the other things we're doing simply won't matter, because we have to find ways to work with private partners in a way that they are willing to work with us and they are willing to share sensitive information with us, and we are willing to do that with them. And let me tell you, I think that that is really, really difficult. None of us are ready to share information with private industry, nor are they willing to share information with the government. You know, the last thing that private industry wants to hear is that the government is here to help you with your cybersecurity. That doesn't go over well if your business is making money and using information to make that particular money. The last thing I'd like to leave you with, of course, is that, again, this is not somebody else's job. This is our job. Every one of us in here has a responsibility in this area, not only in terms of our professional duties and responsibilities, but also in terms of the way that we personally use information. Remember I told you, I no longer use this to check my bank account because I'm afraid that I'll do it someday and it'll say zero because somebody's hacked it and taken the money. But we need to inculcate in our subordinates a higher degree of understanding about the threats and risks that we face, and we also need to make sure that we as individuals also do a much better job at securing our cyber systems, and through that, our nations and our alliance. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate this information and look forward to your questions. Thank you.